Welcome back to What Matters This Week. I'm Lauren Maloney. Joining us this Sunday is Dan Krymkowski. He is a sociology professor from UVM and also author of a new book titled The Color of Culture. Appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the title of the press release, I should say, kind of captured my attention here. It was "Why So Few Black Skiers and Ballet Dancers," and that's really, what the book delves into. What made you look into this?
So for my entire career, and I've been at UVM now for about 30 years, I have studied social inequality. Inequality with regard to race, inequality with regard to ethnicity, with regard to class, and with regard to gender. And when I've done this, like most sociologists, we've studied inequality in terms of things like income and wealth and occupation and education. And those aspects of social inequality have been studied over and over again. So it occurred to me that it would be interesting to study a kind of non-socioeconomic aspect of inequality. And I was reminded of the verse in Deuteronomy, "People do not live by bread alone," and that non-monetary things are important. And I've always had a lot of interest in culture. I myself am a classical musician. I'm an amateur actor. I've done some amateur dancing. I like painting and sculpture. And I wouldn't call myself a great outdoors person, but I do like to do things in the outdoors. I like to go hiking. I like to swim. I like to ski. And so it occurred to me that it would be interesting to think about social inequality with regard to participation in culture more generally, and in these forms of culture in particular. And since I have participated in these forms of culture, I have noticed over the years that they are predominantly white activities. So I thought it would be very interesting to have a closer look at some of these activities. Also, I did some work for a number of years with a colleague over in the Rubenstein School who studied visitation to national parks. And visitors to national parks are also overwhelmingly white. So I would say those are the two main reasons that I became interested in this area.
You then took a look at 9 particular activities, which include golf, hiking, hunting and fishing, water activities, cold water recreation, classical music, painting and sculpture, ballet, and theater. Is it because of your interest in those that you delved into these?
For the most part, yes. But then I wanted to explore a wide range of activities, both in the fine arts and in outdoor recreation. So, for instance, I do not hunt or fish, and I am not a ballet dancer, even though I've done other types of dancing. So partly it was because I was interested in these activities and I participated in some of them, but also I wanted to cover a number of different activities and activities that have not been discussed much in the literature.
So what did you find here and what surprised you?
So what I found was that in virtually all of these activities, African Americans participate at rates that are far lower than whites. And so for instance, in golf, in terms of having golfed in the last year, 17% of whites say they've done that, only 6% of African Americans. In terms of hiking, 38% of whites say they've done that, only 13% of African Americans. In terms of attending art museums, 24% of whites have done that, 12% of African Americans have done that. So I think the first thing I found that was surprising is how large some of these differences were, and the fact that these differences were to be found in virtually every activity that I looked at. But beyond just documenting the differences with some good national level survey data, I wanted to try to understand the differences. So with statistical modeling, I explored some of the possible reasons for these differences. One big reason that came up was income differences and other social class differences between African Americans and whites. Many of these activities, downhill skiing for instance, are not cheap to participate in. So income and other socioeconomic factors did explain a part of the reason for the lower rates of African American participation. But the surprising thing was that the socioeconomic differences did not explain most of the difference in participation. So that was a little surprising to me. I thought maybe socioeconomic differences would have explained more. And also, I tried to look at the extent to which there has been change over time. There has been some change over time, but not very much. So I would say those three things are what surprised me the most.
How then does the world normalize these activities for everyone, make them more inclusive?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to address socioeconomic differences between African Americans and whites. African Americans have much lower incomes, much lower levels of wealth, much lower levels of education, and so on than whites. And this is due predominantly to past discrimination in our society, but also to continued discrimination these days in areas such as employment. So we need to address these socioeconomic differences between the races so that African Americans will have the same socioeconomic opportunity to participate in these areas. Then I would say, in addition to that, we need to address the current racism that exists with respect to some of these activities. You probably are aware from reports in the media that over the past few years, African Americans have been harassed while on the golf course. They've been harassed at swimming pools. They've been harassed in art museums and so on. So this type of unwelcoming behavior needs to be addressed. And then I would say, thirdly, that because African Americans have historically been excluded from these activities and have not had the opportunity to develop an interest in these activities, I think people who run these activities need to make a special effort to reach out to African Americans. And that is occurring to a certain degree. In all of these areas, there are efforts to try to reach out to African Americans and to try to diversify the range of participation, but change is slow in coming.
Then, Professor, I wonder then what you think about how maybe athletes or celebrities make a difference. You know, Tiger Woods comes to mind, Serena Williams playing tennis. How does that play into this?
Well, I think it certainly can help open some doors. But one thing we need to keep in mind is that in the realm of golf, for instance, Tiger Woods is an exception. I mean, Tiger Woods is one of only, I believe, 3 African-American men on the PGA Tour. And up until fairly recently, country clubs like Augusta didn't even allow African-American members. So I think this can help, but I think more effort needs to be made. There is a famous basketball player by the name of Stephen Curry, I believe, who has started a special program to interest African-American youth in golf. So I think that celebrities and athletes and so on, can make a difference, but I think we need a wider societal commitment to try to change some of these things because, I mentioned the quote from Deuteronomy, people don't live by, bread alone, but, participating in culture is really important. It's a basic aspect of what it means to be a human being and to have an opportunity to participate in a lot of different areas of culture. The United Nations has said it's a basic human right. And, having these experiences is really, really important. And the other thing I found in my research is that whites participate in many, many more different types of cultural activities than African Americans. And beyond that basic human right, I would also say that participating in culture gives us cultural capital, knowledge about culture, which can help us in our lives and in the labor force. It gives us social capital, that is, access to social networks and things like that. And I don't want to forget to mention that participating in these cultures, in these forms of culture, can sometimes have health benefits. So perhaps you've seen some of these reports on forest bathing or nature bathing about how being out in nature can really have beneficial physiological effects, such as lowering your blood pressure and so on. So I think the participation of celebrities is great and will help, but I also think we need a wider societal effort to address some of these inequities.
Professor Dan Krymkowski, appreciate you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.